Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and what's next. It's a show that asks questions and peels back the layers of our average everyday experience and goes beyond scratching the surface. We interview people doing incredible things who are making a difference around the globe. Join me as we listen in and get one step closer to understanding that big ideas shared create collaboration. Collaboration can inspire community, and communities create social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So today's interview is with a guy that I met in 1987. I haven't seen him since. We've stayed a little bit in touch, and he's a magician, actually. It makes a lot of sense for those of you who know me from my background and so on. And I think he's an incredibly funny guy. He's currently working the Magic Castle in Hollywood. He lives in Hollywood, and he's a writer. He's a historian. Can I call him a character? He's a bit of a character. I think you're going to enjoy the interview a lot. And what we talk about is ghosts. Yes, we are talking about the metaphysical in this interview. And Tom calls himself, he's kind of an investigative journalist, I suppose. And he's written 11 books on ghosts. His most recent book, or one of his more recent books, called Haunted Hollywood. Oh, Tom, I'm sorry, but it's online. We'll leave a link there for you. Haunted Hollywood, I believe, that came out in 2009, is going to be coming out. He's going to be coming out with a new, updated version of it with some more stories and probably a new introduction. I certainly hope he is anyway. But in this interview, we talked about ufology. We talked about scrying. I mean, I don't even know what the heck that is, but it's something about using mirrors and fortune telling. He talks about how most of us, or many of us, have ghost stories, and he talks about a mirror in Hollywood. I think Suite 1200, and we'll wait to hear more about it in the interview, where a reflection of Marilyn Monroe could be seen. And one of the most interesting things I think I took from this is that he said he's learned to say to people, tell me about it. And in other words, he's learned to sit and listen. You're going to have some fun with it. You're going to have a few laughs and find out some really interesting things here. Tom Ogden, buckle up. Well, welcome to Face, folks, and we've got another, this could be one of the most interesting interviews, actually, I've done in a while. It's with a guy that I know, Tom Ogden, who I met many years ago, face to face, ironically, and here we are today on the phone. Tom, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, David.
Tom has been voted the Parlour Magician of the Year. My listeners will now know how we're connected. He's a funny guy, but and a very talented magician, very talented performer. In fact, he's working the Magic Castle in Hollywood tonight, this week. He's worked for a crazy amount of celebrities, Ronald Reagan included. Would you call Ronald Reagan a celebrity, Tom?
I think he vaguely falls under
he falls into that category, right?
Well, actually, yes, since he was an actor for years.
There you go.
He was a president.
Yeah. And we're not going to talk about that, about his acting skills versus his presidential ability, but maybe that's another podcast. But more importantly, Tom, I think, and I say more importantly, we'll see what he has to say. He's also a writer. He's got 11 books that he's written about ghosts, which just I find incredibly fascinating, and I just found out moments ago he's got a couple of magic books. He's written a book about the circus, and he's got a new book coming out, a new edition of a book called Haunted Hollywood in August, and I think we're going to talk about ghosts today, aren't we, Tom?
Sure, boo.
That's right.
It'll be an early Halloween episode.
There's so many connections here, Tom. I mean, so you're a magician, circus, you're kind of a historian. Why ghosts?
The magic really is the connection, David.
Okay.
I have had an enviable career as a writer in that the first book that I had went through 3 editors just because of upheavals in the publishing house. But of course, just like many industries are insular, so is the publishing world. So the editors moved on to other publishing houses. So I'd get a call from them at their next house saying, hey, I'm over here now at Prentice Hall, what do you have for us? Or I'm over here at Penguin, what do you have for us? So although you still had to do the book proposal so that they could take it to the editorial board for approval, basically all of my books were pre-sold before I never had to do what they called a query letter, which is an initial letter.
Which I do all
saying,
the time.
I have this idea. Would you be interested in seeing a proposal? and then you get the rejections from that.
Right, right.
I was already at the point of, can you have the proposal to us by Friday?
And you say magic was the connection. Is that because of your...
And magic was the connection because I have Max Maven, who is a great mentalist, mind reader, and dabbles in magic. So he's has that, comes from that background world too. And I have been friends forever. And we have a mutual friend named Michael Kurland, who has written close to 50 books. Most of them were what they used to call dime novels, sci-fi books.
Sure, yep.
Direct-to-paperback books to take with you on a summer vacation or whatever. And Michael had, for a time, was living here in Los Angeles. And we used to hang out a lot. And he got the contract for a one-volume encyclopedia called, well, the Encyclopedia of Magic and Magicians.
Mm-hmm.
Michael was not a magician, but he has a lot of magician friends, including Max and me.
Right.
And a now deceased, also I guess you'd call him a mentalist as well as a magician, named T.A. Waters. And Michael had another book due at the same time as the Magic Encyclopedia, and he couldn't get them both finished on time, so he gave the book contract to Waters, who'd already had 2 books published by that point.
And this is the beginning of 11 books about ghosts, 2 magic books.
Because
I'm wondering if there's some sort of ghostly backdoor connection here.
The connection is magic. I went to him and said, I know nothing about. Why didn't you give me the book? And he said, well, I didn't know you wanted to write the book. I said, the only other thing I've ever done is I traveled 5 years with circuses. My early touring with circuses. Do you think they'd want an encyclopedia of that? Well, he called his editor, and they did, and I got the contract. Well, that editor then moved on to the Idiot's Guide series.
Which I have sitting on my desk here, by the way. Tom has also written the complete Idiot's Guide to Magic Tricks.
And when that book was in proof sheets, my editor said, besides our instructional how-to books, we're starting a line of general interest topics, and we want to do one on ghosts. You're a magician. You must know all about ghosts. Would you write a book called The Complete Idiot's Guide to Ghosts and Hauntings? And I said, does it pay in advance against royalties? And he said, yes. And I said, I know everything there is to know about.
So you're passionate about ghosts, or is it you're passionate
about ghosts?
So you were. It was a paying gig for you.
It started as a paying gig.
Wow.
As a paying gig.
Well, 11 books later, it's got to be more than just cash.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me about that.
Because what it started as was a giant term paper, basically. I knew how magicians could produce the illusion of ghosts on stage, and have for hundreds of years. I knew how magicians did what they used to call ghost shows or spook shows back in the 1950s.
Yep.
That after showing a horror movie, they'd do a little 15-minute magic show with horror themes, then they'd turn out the lights, and ghosts would fly out over people's heads. I knew how they did that. But I knew nothing about not only all the anecdotes. I mean, we've all heard ghost stories.
Sure.
But I mean that there are ghost societies, not just clubs, but ghost societies that get together and talk about the theory and philosophy of ghosts, what they are,
sorry for laughing,
what their essence is, why they come back, why they don't come back. They're trying to find, the paranormalists went through a long period, and I don't know whether they've given up, I just haven't heard a lot about it recently, of trying to find the equivalent of the unified theory or field in physics. They were trying to do the same thing in ghosts. Why do some people see an apparition, yet another person will only sense that there's just something weird in the room?
Right.
Or only feel the hair go up on the back of their neck. Or other people will hear something, but other people don't hear anything, they see something. Why is it different?
So, Tom, you've spent your life fooling people. I mean, aren't you a skeptic? How do you get pulled into what appears to be, I don't know. I mean, isn't this what? Yeah, like isn't this what Houdini spent a good portion of his life doing? Was debunking?
There's a difference between skepticism and investigation.
Hmm.
I believe in science, you start with a theory, and then you go out to test it, and you do a control, and you do variations.
Sure.
And find out what happens. Basically, that's where alchemy came from. Let's see what happens if we stick this with this. Oh, it doesn't purify our soul, but it does change lead to gold. That's interesting.
Yeah, and also a nice magical connection there as well with alchemy.
So the same thing should happen in ghosts, and although I hate to make the comparison, ufology, UFOlogy, that you should say, okay, I believe people are seeing something.
Right.
Let's find out what they are. So let's find out what they're not. Let's take the things that we can explain and see if we can look a little closer and see what we may have missed. And then we peel all those away, and then we're still left with these unexplainable stories.
So are you a journal?
Skeptics, on the other hand.
Yep.
I believe start with the premise there are no such things as ghosts.
Right.
And therefore, I'm going to prove that to you.
Well, so you're a historian, magician, and a journalist.
As a matter of fact, that's what I call myself, a paranormal journalist.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm not a ghost hunter, per se. In other words, I don't go in to an allegedly haunted place with an electromagnometer and a thermometer and a tape recorder and infrared light, and when I hear a bump, say, oh, that must have been the ghost on the stair, because I have an episode that's got to go on TV that week.
Right.
Right. In other words, I instead will listen to people's stories, and the ones I believe most are from the people who have nothing to gain and everything to lose by telling me their stories.
And can you tell us one of those? I mean, that's a really interesting phrase. Nothing to lose and
All right.
Did you say everything to lose and nothing to gain?
Everything to lose, nothing to gain, and everything to lose by telling me the story. And a short example of that type of person might be a judge or a lawyer.
Uh-huh.
Because you don't want an insane judge, a kooky judge, or a kooky lawyer. But I'll give you a very good example, and I won't give you the person's name.
Can you tell us what it rhymes with?
Not only for confidential purposes, but also, to be honest, I don't remember her name.
So you're not a man of ethics, is what you're saying, Tom.
Oh, that's what that's saying. I'll tell you the truth.
So hang on, let me get this straight. You wrote the book because it was cash, and now you just yeah. Now we're getting to the bottom of this story. We're getting somewhere now.
By the way, how much is this interview paying?
That's right.
Click.
Yes, my assistant will get back to you. Yeah.
I'm sure she will. I was performing on a cruise ship in it was my first time in Buenos Aires. And for any of your listeners who have traveled, especially to Latin American ports, that have not prearranged transportation, they know when they come out of immigration, it's not just there are lots of options, it's almost chaotic of the registered and the non-registered cab drivers, bus driver. It's just overwhelming.
Sure, yeah, totally.
People offering to take you to your place. And this was my first time, and I walked out, and this was the first time that the cruise line was not having one of their port agents meet me. They were saying, just catch a cab to the dock.
Right.
All right.
So you were working a cruise ship. You weren't.
I was performing on a cruise ship.
Oh, I see. Okay, you weren't there on a holiday.
As a magician.
Okay.
I was performing on a cruise ship.
Yeah.
So I get out, there's this sea of people trying to get my attention, and a woman who had been behind me in the lane going through customs looked over at me sympathetically and said, "First time?" And I said, "Uh-huh." She said, "Where are you heading?" And she was American. Mm-hmm. And I told her, and she says, "That is on my way. Would you like a lift?" And I said, "Sure." Well, we go out to her limo. and not stretch limo, just a black car waiting for her. Turns out her husband was attached to the U.S. Embassy.
Okay.
Which is why I can't say who it was, even if I knew.
Right.
And we start talking, and she says, "Oh, you're a magician." I said, "Yes, and I'm writing this book about ghosts." She says, "I have a ghost."
Sorry, she said what? I have a ghost?
I have a ghost.
I have a ghost. Okay.
And I had learned, even by that point, if people start telling me their stories, I don't ask questions. I don't say, but because there'll be leading questions. If I say, "Did you hear anything? Did you this? Did you do this? Did it look like this?"
Sure, yeah.
Instead, I've learned to just say, "Tell me about it."
That's great. I love it. That's great.
Now, after they've told me their whole story, then I can ask them to clarify things.
Sure, yeah.
But at the beginning, I want to hear it from their memory, what their experience was. And she said, when my grandmother died, this is her speaking, when my grandmother died, we inherited the full-length mirror that always hung in her foyer, in her hallway. And we hung it in our house at exactly the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And every so often, when I'm walking down the hall, out of the corner of my eye, I could swear I see my grandmother's reflection in the mirror. And as soon as I turn full to the mirror, there's nothing there other than my own reflection. And to reassure her, instead of saying, "Well, you're crazy, of course," I said, "This is not an unusual story." And throughout history, dating back to ancient myths, reflective surfaces have been used in fortune-telling, called scrying. That's the particular type of fortune-telling.
What's it called?
Scrying. Scrying, scrying.
Okay. Using mirrors.
Which originally was looking into a pool of water, which is the part of the myth in the Harry Potter book.
Right, of course,
when you look that reflective surface.
Yeah.
People would look in a lake or rushing water, and the form we know it in today is the crystal ball.
Right.
Or any kind, and of course the famous mirror, mirror on the wall.
Or as in my case, the magic 8-ball.
Yes. Exactly. If you're
it's provided
if your spirit has to be an octagonal.
That's right. Hey, listen, it's provided some profound direction for me and my family for many years now, Tom.
Right. At those moments of indecision.
That's right. So Tom, you say to people.
Oh, just a second. So
yeah, go.
Tell you what happened with that. I told her that it's not that unusual.
Right.
I told her about the haunted mirror that for years hung in the lobby of the Hotel Roosevelt here in Hollywood, California, where I am. It's now been put in storage. Actually, there's a rumor it's been sold to Lindsay Lohan. But
is that right? Hey, okay.
Marilyn Monroe's reflection would appear in the mirror. But that's a whole separate ghost story. I won't, unless you want to hear more about it, I won't tell the story. But her ghost reflection appeared in it. That while people were looking in the mirror, Marilyn's reflection would appear behind, as if she were standing behind them, and she's primping her makeup. And the reflection was first seen, I'm telling you the story anyway, was first seen by a cleaning person, a maid, I guess, and it was in the suite that Marilyn, when she stayed at the Roosevelt, she always stayed in Suite 1200, and it was there. And the manager, and of course, instantly all the staff knew about this.
Yeah.
So the manager took it and put it in his own office, and eventually the word got out into the spook world, and having a sense of humor, he put it on display by the downstairs elevators. And why I say a sense of humor is on the adjacent wall, they posted a full-length poster of Marilyn Monroe. And if you stood just right, you could take a picture of yourself with your reflection in the mirror and Marilyn behind you.
Oh, come on.
Because they knew the history and people would come in just to see it.
Of course, yeah.
And they moved it wisely then up by the gift shop so that you were right next to the gift shop.
Yeah.
And then the hotel was bought by a new upscale company that really, they don't throw you out, but they don't really invite tourists in unless you're actually staying there at the hotel.
So people who have these stories, Tom, you said something about really insightful to me. I think that where you don't project, you don't put any of your perspective on for a time. You say, just tell me your story, and you listen, and you sit and you listen. And I'm sure you've got stories about where that's 5 minutes long and hours long. So is that pretty common that most folks who have experienced something supernatural like this really do want to get it off their chest?
I've had, I will say yes. Whether they actually ever do it, I would be surprised if more than 25% of the people actually do it.
Actually tell their story.
I remember doing a lecture on a cruise ship, and this is how it started to change me for what you call the mercenary magician.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
To
the heartless.
Someone who is taking this very seriously.
Uh-huh.
As I was doing a talk on what are ghosts and what aren't they, and why would they come back. And I gave the top 6 reasons why a ghost has either not moved on to the next world or has returned. And, of course, you ask the people, do you have any stories or any comments? And you get a few, and then there's always a gaggle of people who come up and want to talk to you privately.
Of course, yeah.
And it's not that they're afraid that everyone else will think they're stupid.
Right.
Or crazy, or whatever. And there was a teenage girl who came up and told me a terrifying story of not of a demon, but just of a spirit that was in her room that would not leave. And she was close to tears in telling me this story.
Yeah.
And I had nothing to tell her. I mean, I'm not an exorcist. I'm not a ghostbuster.
Right.
But my point of it was...
And you're certainly not a priest.
The point was she definitely believed this.
Right.
And it fell into the person. She knew who the person was. It was a relative that she felt had some sort of a message that had to be given. So it fell within the parameters of one of the reasons why ghosts would return. So when I started hearing enough stories, by the way, the wife at the counseling, she said, I said, well, what have you done with it? And she said, well, I was afraid to break it in case my grandmother's spirit is trapped in it somehow.
Right.
She said, I certainly wasn't going to sell it because I'm not going to sell my grandmother.
Right.
She said, so we boarded it up and put it in storage.
Wow.
Till we decide but we are too freaked out to let it hang.
It's like Raiders of the Lost Ark. Put it in the warehouse.
That's right. To me,
I love
what most people do, both physically in her case and mentally in the case of the other person. They just try to put it away and not ever address.
Well, don't we do a lot? Don't we do that though? We could go all religious now too. We could talk about tradition. We could talk about Buddhism and Hinduism and Christianity and so on. I mean, isn't that what a lot of us do with anything supernatural? You know, David Hume said in the Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion a couple hundred years ago, any metaphysical question, you should just commit it to the flames. Get rid of it. It's useless. It's meaningless, right? Because he was an empiricist. We can't prove anything about it, Tom, so why would we waste our time? But I think what I'm hearing from you is, hang on a second here, I can't argue with these people's stories.
I can argue with the story. I can't argue with their belief in the story. Mm-hmm. I could say, if I were the skeptic, if I was the skeptic to them, I would say, well, it's very possible that that's just light refraction.
Right.
And you are putting in your mind that it was owned by your grandmother, and therefore. Or to the girl, well, you're just afraid of the dark, and when you hear anything,
Right.
you think. And once you think it once, you will forever think that's what it is.
Well, then it all becomes about perspective, right, and worldview and
Right.
so on. Yep.
Right. But, again, going back to James Frazier, The Golden Bough, that magic was around before science or religion. That basically magic was used as was an attempt to understand the world around us and to how to deal with it. And those who felt there's a physical way to do that on this world became scientists. And those who looked to a higher power creator went to religion. I had to address in one of my books, Haunted Chicago. There are more haunted cemeteries in Chicago than any other major metropolis in the United States.
Wow. Okay.
And several haunted churches. And I had to address, and mostly Catholic cemeteries, but not exclusively. So I decided to investigate what do various religions say about ghosts. Do their tenets, or in the case of the Catholic Church, their catechism, say that they are real or impossible or demonic, or what do they say they are? And I was surprised to find that the Catholic Church is actually more liberal than the Protestant and especially the Lutheran aspect of the Protestant Church. There is nothing in the Catholic Catechism that expressly says you are judged at the time of death.
Right.
But that doesn't But it doesn't say that your soul immediately goes to heaven or hell.
Right.
After all, they have purgatory.
They have
and
purgatory.
For a while, they had. I'm sorry. Where did the infants go?
Afraid
Unbaptized.
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
I'm blocking on the name, but they don't. But that's not part of their.
Is it Barnes and Noble?
Yes, that's where they go.
Right.
Wouldn't it be nice if there were enough of them to go to?
Yes.
But there's nothing in the Catechism that says it is impossible for a spirit to return. Once it's there, it's there. I thought, but whereas the stricter Protestant denominations say that if you see a holy apparition, that may be real. In other words, Mary, the weeping statue.
Right, sure.
Lourdes. If you see a holy apparition of either Mary, Jesus, or the saints of the Bible, it's possible that is holy, or it may be Satan trying to trick you. But almost all of the others are not actually ghosts, because the soul is staying in the grave until the time of the rapture. So, I mean, and every sect within every religion has a different belief in whether ghosts exist.
Absolutely.
And that in itself is such a complicated issue.
Oh, no kidding. I guess so.
That it was beyond the scope of any of my books, which were basically collections of ghost stories.
Well, I remember being in Cambodia years ago, and I do a lot of the development work I do there, and things have come a long way in a long time. But I was in some rural communities, and one person said, "Hey, Dave, why don't you do a couple things for some of the kids?" And when somebody else found out about it, they actually said, "No, I don't want you to do that because of the belief system here in this particular village, and I don't need these people that I'm working with and trying to build community with to have you going away thinking you're some sort of medicine man. Thanks very much." Even though,
let me try to tell you a brief version of that happening.
Oh, I bet you've got a few doozies.
I was performing on a cruise ship, and on a seaborne cruise, and they had a guest lecturer from Indonesia, and we were sailing through the islands, and at one point the captain comes on the loudspeaker and says, "We are now passing the island where our celebrity chef was born." And it's from the bridge, and he's holding the mic open, and he says to her, "Do you want to stop?" And you hear, "We can't stop. It's not on the itinerary." He says, "Oh, we have time." She says, "But there's nothing to do there." I mean, this is a little island that there's no tourist industry at all. It's a tiny island. And the captain said, "Oh, we stop." And they radio over, and because up on the hills, there was a native village, still lived in thatched huts, still did hand looming of a type of textile called ikat, which I'd never heard of. But there was no way to get up there. I mean, there was no minibuses or anything like that. And Seabourn at that time, you were paying $10,000 a week minimum to be on the boat, on the ship. These millionaires were hopping in the back of pickup trucks and school buses, going up these dirt roads into the hills, just popping along. It's just the greatest adventure.
Right.
In order to be allowed on the island shaman had to kill a chicken.
Oh, here we go.
To check the auspices as to whether it was all right for us to do it. We get up there, and they do some dances for us and greet us, and then the women from the ship, they start going around to look at the weaving. I didn't care much about that. So I, like most of the men, are just kind of standing around, looking at the people who are still in their ceremonial garb, standing around. And I decided, well, what the heck? There are a lot of kids there. I think I'll do some magic tricks for them.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't have any of my Western props with me.
Yep.
So I reached down. I'm going to do a sponge ball routine. That means something to you. I'm going to do a coin trick, let's say.
Sure.
For the listeners.
Shell.
But instead, I pick a couple of pebbles
Yep.
off the ground, not realizing they were from the ceremonial fire circle. And then I do a cut and restored rope with a piece of twine.
With somebody's hair, yeah.
The kris that I was using was one of those sword things I shouldn't be touching.
Yeah.
And then to top it all, I do the torn and restore and Kleenex trick, but instead, I reach up to a tree, pluck off a leaf, crumple it into dust, close my fist, open, the leaf is back together, and I reattach it to the branch.
Oh, no.
Simple sleight of hand magic stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, afterwards, we're bouncing down the mountainside, and the chef leans over to me and says, "It's good we're leaving." And I said,
hilarious.
"Why?" And she said, "The island shaman had heard that there's a competition medicine man on the island.
Wow.
And he was rushing to challenge you to a magical duel to the death." She said, "And he knows where all the poisons are."
Oh, man, that is a great story.
But really, with what we do as magicians, in some cultures, they wouldn't know whether to burn us at the stake or elect us chief.
Well, I think this is part of the reason. I mean, I'm not a radical skeptic by any means, but I think it's part of the reason why I'm a bit of one. I think it's part of the reason why I've chosen to go into philosophy. I mean, the whole notion of mystery and wonder also drove me to philosophy, but I think the idea that, hey, people were being thrown down wells and heads were being cut off because they were doing magic tricks 600-700 years ago, or maybe not that long ago, actually. And look where we are today, and isn't it kind of all connected in some way, And you get into that culture, and, let's talk about from a different perspective, and let's educate those folks, and they're going to be talking about their shaman in the same way that we were talking about them in a couple hundred years. Do you know where I'm going with that?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
But the shaman isn't doing it because he thinks he's fooling the people.
Right.
They are part of an animistic culture where they believe the spirits are everywhere around them and within everything. And we look at it as a Westerner and say, "Oh, come on, it cannot be in that block of wood sitting on the altar you put in your hut." But then again, we believe a man rose from the dead and ascended to heaven 3 days later.
Sure.
It's a matter of belief. What do you believe as opposed to what the other person believes? And in our culture, it's the preacher or the priest that helps us make that interconnection and knowledge of the Lord in the Christian faith, or the rabbi in the in the Hebrew the Jewish faith, and it's the shaman or the medicine man that helps make that connection in those cultures.
I remember.
So I don't think the magic to them serves the same purpose as swinging the incense censer in a Catholic church.
Sure. Somebody once said, and I think it was a philosopher, I think it was Jeremy Bentham, he said part of the reason why people believe in ghosts is because they've never actually seen one. Do you know where he was going with that statement?
I think what he, and I don't know because I'm not familiar with his writings, but I presume what he's saying is that it's much easier to believe in something until you see it and can rationalize it away. People ask me at the end of my talk whether I believe in ghosts because I'm very careful not to say
I've noticed
one way or the other what I actually believe. But and I hate to give away my big ending, but this is what I tell them at the end. I said, I will only make this connection to UFOs once. But in a sense, ghosts are like UFOs in that UFOs are unidentified flying objects. They are unidentified, they're flying, and they're objects. Are they flying saucers? We don't know. Do they come from another world, and are they filled with little green men? We don't know. They are, by name, an unidentified flying object. I said, ghosts, no one has ever come back from the grave that we've been able to 100% for certain know that it is a returned spirit to tell us where they're from and what it's like on the other side. But even if you get rid of the hallucinations, the deliberate frauds, the double exposures, the optical illusions, and any other explanation, there are still thousands and thousands of sightings and experiences. We don't know what to call them because we don't know what they are precisely. So in the meantime, let's just agree to call them ghosts. And now we can further investigate those things, and as more information comes to light, we might be able to say, well, this is that, or this is that. I mean, there are many different theories as to what ghosts are. I mean, many people believe there are even ghost people. Many of them believe they are not souls returning from the grave or from beyond. That they are residual spirits. That a person's essence or spirit has been ingrained or imprinted on the place while they were alive, and we're entering basically a film loop to see that experience.
Speaking of film, so I was actually going to go down another story that I from a backyard sort of party that went redacted to about three of us, a philosopher, a theologian, and another performer, drinking port and slowly probably having too much to drink, talking about ghosts and the supernatural and the metaphysical, me walking upstairs and having something fall in the room and actually getting goosebumps and a shiver. And then I kind of laughed and went, okay, so clearly that was all about perspective. Because, I'd come in from outside. Here we are in the middle of this conversation about the metaphysical, the supernatural, ghosts, etc. Something falls. I didn't do it. Gee, who's in my house? Right? And that's where I go. So I, of course, come back down and...
Sorry.
Or, yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. For sure.
I do a line at the beginning of my talk where I say, now I'm not going to guarantee that anything is going to happen tonight. You're going to be visited by anyone from the other world. But it has been my experience that when enough like-minded people get in a room and want something to happen, things happen.
Things happen, yeah. So why
That's not explaining what that thing is, but they, as you just said, prime themselves for belief.
Sure, yeah. Do people want to be scared? I mean, we've seen this sort of resurgence anyway, of horror films, I'd say, in the last 15 or 20 years. I mean, maybe it's longer.
I think that's different. I think that's different from wanting to be believed in ghosts. I think the horror, the new interest in horror. Oh boy, is this an entire different talk? I think it's coupled with the deadening of society to each other and relying on electronic instruments.
Interesting. So it's about relationship, basically,
or
lack thereof.
It's to stimulate us, to remind us that we're still alive. I mean, because you're never more aware of your mortality than when you think you're going to die.
Right.
And I think that's what the horror thing is about. I think that the interest in ghosts specifically has more, because you notice most the ghosts in horror films are never nice ghosts. They're always demon spirits who are going to eat you. I mean,
right. There's a couple nice ones in Ghostbusters, isn't there?
Yeah, I think there may have been one.
One. I think I just really dated
myself. Even the Marshmallow Man was going to start. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, he was a nice guy up until a certain point, yeah.
Up until a certain point when he...
Yeah, Ray, what have you done?
So, yeah,
it's one of the few...
see what the reboot's going to be like.
Oh, no kidding. It's one of the few movies that a friend and I quote back and forth at least two or three times a week. Oh, yeah. It's it's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
I think the belief in ghosts is... I think we are in a time in general that people are looking for spiritual, or any kind of meaning in their lives. And part of that is survival after death. And if ghosts were proven to be real and that those are not independent spirits from the human species, but actually are humans returned from the beyond, regardless of where they're coming from, it would be proof that at least some people survive after death.
So therefore there is a beyond of some kind.
It's a quest for immortality and a want to believe that proof that we will see beyond our own life.
And Tom, do you think that has to do with actually mortality, or do you think it has to do with, well, if that's true, then how is that going to affect the way I live today? Does that make sense?
Yes. I have not seen it affecting any change in how people live.
Well, I mean, but don't you agree that if there wasn't...
my actors sort of get off their damn phones.
Yeah, well, exactly. Time is short, So, hey, hang on a second here. I'm moving into the afterlife. I got some things I got to get done before that,
But you'll notice that most, and I'm only going to quote other people because I've not done a study myself, but many studies of people who have had a near-death experience have had remarkable changes in their life. That they don't want to die, but they're okay with it. That they've come to terms with it. That they realize that it's inevitability, but there's going to be something else afterwards.
Yeah.
And while there have been all sorts of chemical and scientific explanations of what a near-death experience may be,
sure.
If it changes someone from a hellraiser to a Zen Buddhist, it may have been good they almost died.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think, we got to wrap up the interview shortly, but one of the things that I really, I've been thinking a lot about lately, even so much as, trying to develop a corporate talk around this whole idea of listening. Here I am in international development. I'm a supposed philosopher. I mean, it's about dialogue. It's about asking good questions, but for crying out loud, at some point you got to shut your yap and you got to listen. And I love what you said about, I don't ask questions. I don't slant the dialogue at all. I want to hear your story, and I want to validate what you have to say. And I think that's profoundly, it's affirming, and I think I don't think it's something we do enough, frankly. Never mind, forget about the ghosts. I'm just talking about, relationships as a whole. And then your story about going into the village and them killing chickens and you restoring leaves to the trees is wonderful as well,
Do you remember, you may have only seen the film or read the book, Witches of Eastwick?
Oh, yeah, the film, not
right.
The book, yeah.
And one of the three women, the way that Satan trapped her is that he would listen to her. That no one had ever listened to her and taken Suki. No one had ever taken her seriously before.
Wow. I don't
no one
remember
would ever
that.
listen to her, and he said, well, what do you have to say? I'll listen.
Right.
And just the fact that he would go, uh-huh, but he actually was interested because for the story purposes, he knew how he could lead her once she told what her desires were and all that. But yes, people. Well, my family is the same way. There are 5 kids in my family. My sister once remarked, when we all get together for a family reunion or whatever and sit at the same table, we don't have a conversation. We do 5 overlapping monologues.
That's pretty funny.
She said, and every so often one of us will hear a word that will say, oh, yeah, that happened to me like the time.
Right.
And then you go off and tell that story.
Right.
And you kind of glean things from the other people, but it's never a conversation.
Yeah. Well, I've got a friend, same, who, and I'm sure I've talked about this on a podcast before, but who does in fact sit on the edge of his seat and is waiting for you to shut up. He's really not interested in hearing, well, maybe he's interested in hearing it, but he's sure not listening. And as soon as you're finished, it's boom. It's his story. It's his recent car accident or whatever the heck it is that he's had to go through, and there's just this lack of. I guess there's a lack of commiseration.
Me and I did it right here on purpose. I don't wait. I just jump in.
That's right. Well, hey, but we already established that you just do things for money, and that you have no ethics, Tom. That's pretty clear to me.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, thanks for joining us on Face to Face today. I think our listeners are going to find it really not only fun and entertaining, but I think pretty enlightening as well. I'm just on the Amazon page here. I can't believe all the books you've written on ghosts. It's quite remarkable. Tom Ogden, he's got The Idiot's Guide to Magic Tricks, which is wonderful, by the way. He's got a book on the circus. He's a historian. And talk about just scratching the surface, Tom. I think we'll have to do part 2.
At some point.
Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.